fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of First Stars Podcast third season. How my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. It's an amazing episode because Steve Niles returns to the mothership to discuss The Killing Hole from Storm King Comics. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Niles. Thank you so much for coming to First Stars Podcast again.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on again.
It's totally my pleasure to have you back, sir. I had a great conversation last time, so we're going to talk about The Killing Hole. So, in the introduction, you state that the story was originally written 30 years ago. So, how did your perception of the story change over those intervening years?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that I grew up. The original version was much shorter, it was only about 22 pages, and was really mostly about the friendship between these two guys. And then I just sort of threw in a twist at the end. I didn't really delve too deeply into the psychology of it. Um, and now, I'm almost 60, looking back on my life and looking back at those years, because a lot of that stuff is based on reality. I think I just had a lot more to say this time. I think I had a little more clearer understanding of, who I was when I was 14.
Hmm.
It's a very strange time.
Now, when you're thinking back to those years, especially in the intervening years, were there parts of the story that you thought, now as an older man, this is more important or less important, or this part is something that just held your fascination more now as you look back at pushing nostalgic? What's the
One thing I
nostalgia?
cut because I didn't really think it fit was I put in a bunch of stuff about budding sexuality in the original one. And as I wrote the new one, I approached it differently.
Hmm.
It was more about dating and jealousy among friends and things like that. So I think overall, I think there's just a lot more maturity about it.
Like I said, I really did love the story. It's a fascinating look at not only the time period, but this friendship. And then obviously, well, I guess we might as well talk about the twist of what kind of what the turn that happens. And
Yeah.
it's just an absolute fascinating look at what it is to be maybe that age and having the feeling of the everything is the utmost importance as well at that moment.
Exactly. And that whole thing of, I mean, the way things were then and they are for the characters in the story. My parents were divorced. My mom had to work all the time, so I barely saw her. I was a, the definition of a latchkey kid,
Hmm.
you know, and that was something I really wanted to get in there. Was there was a lot of a lot of unsupervised teens running around,
Hmm.
and what happens with that, especially when boredom sets in. You know, there's nothing more dangerous for a teenager than boredom. You
Yeah,
know,
I agree. And I think the other thing is, so having taught this age group as well, and honestly, at some point, I was this age, obviously, is that we take ourselves so seriously at that age. Like everything is, not only is it about us, but we're the most important, most interesting things in the world,
yeah.
And when you're thinking about writing for that age group, was that a thing too hard to get your mind back in? That kind of like self. No,
A li-
I don't think it's narcissism, but it is a self-obsession at that age.
It really is. Yeah, I wouldn't quite call it narcissism, but yeah, it is a self-obsession. And then it's enhanced by that thing I was saying about not being supervised.
Hmm.
If you're left on your own, of course there's going to be some self-importance. So I really enjoyed delving into that. I thought, it's just such an awkward age. And like it was a little hard for me to get back into. I really had to remember it. I mean, this is one I did quite a few drafts of, including what I did was I wrote a screenplay. I wrote the comic script, and then I wrote a screenplay of it and expanded the whole thing. Wound up discovering some new ideas and inserting that into the comic.
Hmm. It,
So
it, it must have been difficult to think as that age group because I mean, because there's such a different way of speaking and talking that obviously does not sound right to our age, and especially even the our language that we use is not going to be the same 30 years
right.
ago either. So how did you try to get yourself thinking or especially speaking like that age group again?
A lot of it was editing, because the original draft, I think I had them talking a little more, not like 14-year-olds. I
Hmm.
had them really pontificating about their hatred of things, blah, blah, blah. I wound up just going back through and just really just simplifying it. Because I'm like, I remember that, me and my friends talked and stuff, but, we weren't that eloquent.
Hmm.
So, everything's done in sort of short staccato things. So it was fun to go back.
Especially a character like Peter, who is complex, but has to be complex at the right age group. Giving him like the complexity of the thought of a 40, 50, 60-year old is going to be far more difficult because obviously they don't think that way. But he still has to
Right.
be complex enough as a character to warrant the attention of the story and to be able to give some analysis to who he is.
Yeah. Well, I get, are we going to do spoilers?
Um, Mild ones, maybe?
A mild one. I just think, in talking about Peter, what was really fascinating was, he started out as just a very simple outsider, which
Yeah.
we all know. We all know who those kids were, or we were, in my case. Um, so adding that twist that he could potentially be dangerous, I thought really made the character in a way more sympathetic,
Hmm.
um, because he's sad. He's a sad character,
Hmm.
and what happens to him is even worse. You know, uh, and his friend having to make the decisions he had to make. You know, I thought that really added a nice dimension, to the relationship.
Is it difficult not to write Peter with a diagnosis in mind? Like he is
Yes.
obviously suffering from this or that.
Yeah, that's something I went into that a little more, um, in the screenplay, and I wish I had a little more in the comic, but a little more about his home life. I got as much of that stuff in there as I could, because I feel like that's what really defined him. You
Hmm.
know, he was not only alienated by his peers, he was alienated by his family. And set him on a course that's very different than the rest of us.
When you're thinking as well with Peter and what he's going to end up doing, um, you kind of you want to make him, you can't write him as evil because people, I want to say are, you can't write him as Jeremy. He's not the Joker, and he's like, well,
Right.
he's obviously deranged and he's doing all this stuff. How hard was it to walk a line and say, here's a kid who, in many ways, is, I don't know, not normal is the right word, but he's functional in society that you wouldn't look at him walking around and be like, oh, look, that's the Joker. He's wearing this clown makeup and
Right.
he's wearing purple tuxedos and he's saying, doing crazy things. However, you still need to make it clear that this is a kid who you can believe is going to do what he does.
Yeah. And I hope that came across good.
Yeah.
I think Stewart's building dread, and realizing what is happening and what he has to do. I think that defines the moment well.
I really love the comic book. Another thing I loved about it is the art by Trevor Denham. Am I that correct?
Trevor Denham,
Denham.
and Ryan Wynn.
So when you're thinking about the artist, one thing I think is important about this comic book, not only does the writing have to be spot on, but the art has to be very specific. It
Right.
has to not only fit a time period, fit a feel as well. I mean, once again, you can't have something that looks so extreme that it's like, well, this is not real story anymore. But
Right.
so what was about the artwork of Trevor that you felt was set the tone correctly for this story?
Well, first of all, he was a choice made by, Storm King, by Sean and Sandy. They brought him to me. I had a couple ideas for people, and they brought Trevor to me. And as soon as I saw his stuff, I was like, he's perfect, because it is so hard to capture a time period.
Mm,
Unless you're doing like a Western, or the Roaring Twenties, where everything's just completely different.
yeah.
The set 1978 was still essentially America as we know it. It just, there was a lot of things not there. And I thought he kept, my one of the first shots I saw were the kids at the bus stop. And I was like, that one shot tells you everything you need to know about it. It's not modern times.
Yeah,
You know, everybody's up and looking around at each other, and the shy kids are looking down, but there's no phones.
yep,
And it is such a huge difference. The age we grew up, we just didn't have those distractions. So we were a little more focused on each other, I guess. So I thought he just captured the awkwardness of the first day of school at the bus stop very well.
So when you were talking to him, was there any advice you gave him about? I mean, I don't know anything about Trevor if he's a younger dude or an older dude, but was there anything you spoke to him about? It was like this is something you need to think about when you're doing the art for this. This is an element that's most important to maintain.
I got it all in the script. My scripts are very conversational, very much me talking to the artist. So yeah, it was odd. Trevor, we didn't have a lot of contact throughout the thing because everything he was doing made me happy. He worked from the script, and I love the way it turned out. I think it fits the time period and the story really perfectly.
Now, I'm not sure if you know, because I actually don't. Is Trevor Denham from the time period? Like, did he grow up around there, or is he more, or was he
I'm,
younger?
I'm guessing he's a little younger than me, but not much.
Okay, so he has some memory of what it was like. It was like back in the day, son. This was what there was, the 1970s.
Yeah. It's so hard, that is so hard to do. I have another project I worked on that I haven't set up yet that I don't have an artist for because I'm having such a hard time finding somebody who knows the time period. It's set in the late '80s, early '90s Washington D.C. punk scene,
Hmm.
and it's so hard to get people who understand what that was like. Because it wasn't people with mohawks, and it was very subtle. It was a different sort of punk rock look and thing. So the fact that Trevor could handle the '70s so well, I just love it. I mean, all the kids look right. The hair is very specific.
Hmm.
Everybody had the grown out hair. So I thought he just did a great job.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how certain time periods just have a visual aspect to it. Like the 60s, 70s, and 80s feels like it's very specific. The 2000s, I don't think I remember like if someone says did the 2000s look and feel like? I'm like, I don't know, it's the 2000s. But 80s, but the 70s, definitely the 80s when you look back had its own look and feel to it.
Absolutely. I think, the modern look, unfortunately, is people's faces buried in their phones. You know, if I did that same scene, that's what it would be, at the bus stop. It would be everybody ignoring each other.
Could the Killing Hole exist, you think, in as a modern story? If you were to take it out and make it what it is now, would it still function? And how much change do you think would have to be made to make it work?
I think it could work very well right now because I think kids are even more alienated than I felt at that age.
Hmm.
I think they really are. They're cut off from people. Social skills are out the window. I think it's scarily possible for a modern story.
I think the biggest change, in my opinion, because obviously they make that kind of like underground fort. Now it would have to be a discussion all on video games, I think. I think that would
Yeah,
be the biggest difference.
yeah. But everybody, I mean, when I was a kid, I mean, everybody I know had a fort. We all built it. We didn't dig giant holes in the ground. Usually we did tree houses.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a big thing to have your own place to go where you could look at some trash copy of Playboy or National Lampoon or whatever you could get your hands on.
Hmm.
You know, I love that. We did, we had, when we were kids, um, our apartment buildings had storage rooms that went like back like three doors. So we would just go back there and hang out, just so we could be warm. And we wouldn't play music, but we'd do everything else.
I think another great part about the story that kind of gives it a setting is the role of music that plays in how you find, especially Stewart. So how
Yeah.
important was music to you specifically?
It was very important and really, I think, added to my alienation in high school. I had like three friends who liked the bands I liked. Everybody, it was all, it was Van Halen and Led Zeppelin, and it was all, classic rock stuff, which is fine. But at that age, discovering new music that nobody ever heard was huge, was just huge. I had an older sister who turned me on to all this stuff.
Yeah.
So, I was turning on to my friends. And being, in on early days of punk rock and stuff was really exhilarating just to have so much new music coming out.
And I think the cool thing with the story as well is that how you use the music. I mean, part of it feels like the music is there for to help create the setting, the atmosphere of the story. But I also feel like it was a way of defining a character without giving exposition dumps. Like this is music he listens to, so you can kind of
Yeah.
extrapolate what you want about the character based on what you know of the music.
Yeah. And that was a very specific time period. It was sort of like I listened to punk rock, but I hadn't evolved in the look yet. I still essentially looked like a 70s kid, and so does Stuart, but we had t-shirts that pissed people off.
Well, the character definitely had good taste in music. That's for damn sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved getting that in there. It was such a specific time period, when all rock and, all radio was classic rock, and punk rock stuff was, if I didn't have an older sister, I wouldn't have known about it.
Mm.
Because all you ever heard about was like the Sex Pistols, stuff like that. Uh, but being exposed to all the albums and the music, and they used to take me to shows, when I was way too young. So I got to see a lot of that stuff.
Well, like I said, I thought that was fascinating. Another part that was really interesting is you feature a cop named Henry Clark in the story.
Yeah.
Now, was there a real cop that you drew inspiration from that you remember from your childhood that was kind of difficult?
Oh yeah. The scene with the running
Yeah,
and the stalking, all true.
really?
Yeah, yeah. For some reason, he got so mad at us because I guess we embarrassed him with the running away that he would pull up in front of my house at night and turn his lights on
What the hell?
and like make, so my whole room would light up.
What was he trying to do with it?
I don't know. You have to ask him. It was the scariest thing in the world for a 14-year-old, because I mean, scared enough of cops as it is. And then to
Yeah.
have them actively stalking you. He only did it like two or three times and then it stopped.
Did your parents like think anything of it? Like, why is there a cop like stalking outside our driveway?
I never knew. My mom was never home. My dad wasn't around, and we were in an apartment building where only my window and my sister's window faced the parking lot.
Mhm.
So so I never said a word to my mom because then I'd have to explain how it happened.
But it seems like such a minor crime. You guys ran away. It seems. I mean, that'd be pretty standard teenage crap. I didn't think the cop would be like,
I
"I'm
know,
gonna
me
harass this
too.
guy forever."
Yeah, and I didn't even want to run. It was my friend who like bolted and yelled run. So I was like, well, I can't just stand here, So I had to do it. I know it was really minor and they caught us really quickly, you know. So we were just little kids.
I mean, that feels like a horror story in its own right.
That's why I brought it in. I just thought it was a very scary thing as a kid.
And I think another thing, obviously, it has to do with abuse of authority and like representing how authority can is so easily abused. Is that another way to demonstrate why the kids were alienated, that they didn't have these adults to go to
Yeah,
with concern or a problem?
they had no adult role models at all. I mean, because they couldn't turn to their parents. Parents weren't around. Cops are out to get them. So yeah, it's odd. I had a friendly cop in my life too, so I tried to get some of that in there,
Mm.
as well. Because I had a cop that used to come by a theater where I was the usher, and he would just come by and talk to me and stuff, and it was totally different, totally different relationship. So there are two sides.
So, given Peter's life, would you say then does he fall into nature or nurture then?
That is always a tough question, but I lean towards nurture.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so there's a point in the story where Peter explains a line that he crossed. I'm trying to figure out how to discuss it without breaking too much information. But he kind of explains that the narrator reacts in a very final way. Is there a comparison to be made between what he does to what Peter had done?
Um, I think so. I mean, because what he did was horrible. I mean, you can't, even though I love the character, you can't be judge, jury, and executioner. You know, this is the debate I've always had in my head,
Mm,
like, was it really up to him?
right.
But nobody else knew. Did he want to wait till it got worse? You know? Uh, so yeah, a tough thing to juggle.
Now, when you think about the situation, why did he go to a cop and say, "Hey, this is what I believe happened," or go to his parents and say, or his mother and say, "Hey, this is what I think, this is what I believe is happening. Can we do something about this?" Was he that certain that either nothing would come of it, or did he really feel like I'm trying? There's an analogy in my head of like I'm trying to remember what film it was. But sort of like he's my responsibility. He's my friend, my responsibility. I need to do something about this.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that was it. I just don't think he had any trust. He certainly didn't have any trust in cops. I think he thought he'd get in trouble if he did anything with them. And he just didn't have a relationship with his parents,
I,
you know?
So I guess for some reason it's probably a horrible analogy, but the one that popped in my head is the one with Lenny from of Mice and Men when I think when the George decides he has to be the one who takes him out because it's his friend, his whatever, he should be the one who does it. Was it
Yeah,
is it that situation where it's like
it is. I
I'm
think
the one
that's
who
a good
cares about him, I'm the
comparison.
one who should be makes the decision to take him out.
Yeah, I think that's a great comparison, actually.
Hmm. Um, so in your opinion, um, which character then had the bigger influence on the other?
I think Stewart had a bigger influence on Peter because I think Peter was just a mess. He was just a mess, had no social skills, no friends, nothing. And they wind up not only forming a friendship, but he turns them on to music. They have their own place to hang out. I think he helped Peter a lot.
Could of Stewart have stopped Peter before he went that far? Was there a point thing where if Stewart had been either more aware or had the cognitive ability to, as an adult, to kind of look at the situation, could he have stopped it before these things happened?
I don't think so. I don't think he well, he's 14, so I don't think he believed it could happen,
Mm.
to prevent it, so something really horrible had to happen for him to realize what was going on.
Technically, I mean, there's a twist at the end that I don't want to dive too much into because I don't want to spoil it too much. But technically, Stewart, on some level, is a killer at this point.
Mhm.
I mean, there's something that you said that happens at the end that you kind of question, kind of like debatable at that point on what that is. But as far
Yeah.
as the Stewart goes, how does that now you think impacts him that he is technically now a killer himself?
Well, I think it destroyed his life. I think it absolutely destroyed his life. I think that's why, we see him as we do. He's sort of been doomed since the day it happened.
Mm.
I think I mean, as I sort of hint, he sort of convicts himself. It's just too much. And he has to get it out, get it off his chest. And if you can imagine at that age feeling that way, how from 14 to almost 50,
Mm.
of this horrible guilt. Yeah, I think.
So the good cop that you mentioned is a good cop in the story named Officer Watson,
Yeah.
which is the one that Stewart eventually confesses to, for about what happened.
Yes.
We don't actually get a reaction from Officer Watson because
Right.
so we don't know his reaction to the story. In your opinion, I'm sure in your head you kind of wrote what you think his reaction would be. So,
Yeah.
what do you think was Officer Watson's reaction to what happened? What he's going to read about the
That's
confession?
that's a great question. I'm not really sure. I think in a way he may have suspected, and this is sort of finding out that he was right. But there's also a side of me that thinks it's a complete surprise that he would hear from somebody after so long,
Hmm.
you know.
Do you think Officer Watson would believe the confession?
Yeah, yeah. If I wrote the scene, he would have been very elderly. He would have been much older. And yeah, I think he would have believed it. I think because I think it fits what happened.
Would he be disappointed in Stewart for what happened, or would he view Stewart as a hero for
I
stopping?
think he'd be sad. I think he'd feel sorry for him. Sad that that's the circumstances he had to deal with.
So interesting thing about Peter is, as you said, he's 14 years old. Criminally, he wouldn't even be tried as an adult. Probably he'd be out by 18. Was there, you think, a way for him to have turned back from what he did? Like, could he have been in the system and been rehabilitated to the point where he could function, or do you think he has stepped over a line that he's not going to step back?
I think incarceration and punishment usually would make it worse.
Yeah.
You know, I think Stewart was really grounding for him. Was one of the few things he could turn to, and without him and just being in the system, I think I think he would have became much, much worse, and we would have had more of what he did.
How about for Stewart? I mean, as you said, he's been punishing himself probably for 40 years. Do you think he has been punishing himself? Do you think he has been acting either to make up for what he did, or do you think he is just got somehow damaged throughout his life
I
because
think
of
he's just miserable and damaged. Not that that's funny, but I think that's the direction he went.
what is this? Is it was the confession enough, you think, for Stewart to kind of release the sins that he committed, or do you think
I
he
think
does require some other further?
I think it was just enough that he could die in peace, relative peace, anybody who's tormented like that. So I think it's possible.
I think the one I feel bad for in some ways is Officer Watson because he just has this dumped on him, and I was like, what does he do with that information? It's like,
Yeah,
you can't arrest the guy at this point, really.
yeah,
What does he do now with that information?
exactly. He just lives with it. It's just one of those twists. You know,
I,
he
I,
finally has an answer to something that was probably been bugging him for years. So
you wonder if Henry Clark, Officer Clark, would be like, "Yeah, I thought so. This
yeah,
all those years, I knew this was coming."
yeah. I never did follow up on him, but I always pictured he just passed away early. You know, miserable, miserable guy.
Had a heart attack, ate too much crap.
Yeah, picked on too many kids.
Like I said, I found that The Killing was such a wonderful story. It's such a great story. Are you going to write more stories like this, more like historical, kind of like it's not historical fiction, but it's sort of like that kind of realistic fiction.
I like it. It was really, I had a moment where I was almost added a supernatural element and was just like, no, 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 no. I gotta accept the challenge and do this with no monsters, no devils and witches and all the stuff I usually do. And I wound up having so much fun. So if I can find another story, like that I would definitely do it. I would definitely do it. I did do. I've written a thing called "Take It Back," which is about my days playing music, but that's totally autobiographical.
Mm.
Nobody dies.
So, as far as the supernatural, what was the supernatural element you're going to add to the story? What was going to happen?
I didn't know. I didn't know. I was just like, are there things in the woods? What's does he get possessed? That was another thing. Did some supernatural force take over Peter? I was going down all the usual corridors I walk, and just decided no, no, I got to keep this based in reality, and I'm really happy I did.
Well, was it a more difficult challenge to keep the story compelling without going down the road of supernaturals?
For me, yeah, because I use it as a bit of a crutch safety net. I'm so used to doing monsters and stuff like that, and it comes very naturally. So it was a bit harder to write this, but I think it worked out.
I think it was fantastic. It kind of reminded me a little bit of of the Stephen King story of going. Then he goes back to the kids playing on riding bikes and stuff like that. That's where my brain immediately went to.
Yeah, Stand By Me.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
I always think of Stand By Me, River's Edge, and there was a movie called Over the Edge. Did you ever see that?
No.
It was Matt Dillon's first movie, and literally about a group of teenagers growing up in a planned community.
Yeah.
So it like as a kid, it spoke to me, and that's the one I always cite. But I've had several people go like, "This is like Gen X, Stand By Me." It's like, oh, okay, okay, I'll take that.
Yeah, you can definitely that it's not that isn't a bad comparison to be made to be connected to Stand By Me.
It's a great story. I love that story.
So what's next for you?
Right now, I'm in the middle of I'm pitching some stuff, trying to get some new deals set up. But I have about I'm working on three graphic novels right now, and a one shot that, and unfortunately, nothing's been announced, so I can't really say what they are. And I'm planning my first Kickstarter.
Ooh, very cool.
Yeah, I'm going to do a collection of Cal McDonald stories, and with 8 illustrations by 8 different artists and all that. So it's going to be a nice little prose anthology.
Oh, very cool. Well, when you're ready to promote that, come right on back, sir.
Oh, I will definitely. I definitely will.
It has been a great pleasure to talk with you again, Mr. Niles. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Have a great day.
All right, you too.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Further Stars Podcast. Please like and subscribe. Turn for the next episode when Arlen Escopita boards the Mothership discuss Found on NBC. To your next voyage, travel on.